All right, just going to record a quick one here. Basically, my stepson has a NA 2J Soarer, and he's on his what's called P plates in Australia, so he can't just go ahead and turbo it. Now, when I was his age, and I got into cars, I had a friend who was into Corollas, and he used to show me how you could go to the wreckers and you could get, say, longer, lower control arms off a later model Corona, or a Sigma, for example, or maybe a bigger sway bar off a Celica or something like that, or even a diff, a bigger diff out of, say, I don't know, a T18. And then if you wanted, you could get lower gears, like 4.3 gears, out of the front of a four-wheel drive Tarago van. Maybe I shouldn't have let that secret go, but there you go. And so with his Soarer, I've just been trying to help him. We were going to eventually convert it to turbo. Currently we've got some extractors we've got to put on there, and he's a fabricator, so we've got the extractors. We just need to basically remove the old manifold and then make a piece to mate from the extractors to the rest of the existing exhaust. So that's the next thing. But when I saw this come up for sale, I said, Ollie, you need to buy this. So what this is an Adaptronic standalone ECU. Once upon a time, there was Vipec, which is now Link, Haltech, Adaptronic, and then a bunch of other crappy ones like Wolf 3D and Microtech, which Microtech is absolute dirt. Okay, and that's what ECU I had on my Corolla, and I drove it around for its entire life until we finally logged in with, you had to have this special cable. We logged into it and found it didn't have a tune at all. I'd been driving it on a base map the entire time. So there you go. And then I sold the car like that. So I got him this Adaptronic ECU. It's quite good. You can plug in a USB and run the ECU on the bench. But what we need to work out is, they used to make an Adaptronic harness that goes from here and plugs straight into the ECU plugs of the Soarer. So essentially just a patch harness, boom, plug in your ECU, take your car off to the dyno tuner and get it tuned. Bob's your uncle. Because Haltech bought Adaptronic and absorbed a lot of their information to make the new Elite ECUs, that's why these are very similar to a Haltech Elite ECU. You can't just, well, one, the information's not around, and two, you can't just buy the patch harness. So I got to thinking, essentially what you're going to do to make a patch harness is you need a receptacle that takes basically the plug on a factory ECU that you can then pin off and run the pins into these connectors for the standalone that you're using. And then you need a pin out like this. Now this, the engine is a 2JZGE, but this pin out happens to be the same plugs as 1JZGTE for ZZ30 and JZX90. Some of the pins might be different, but the plugs are identical. So you need this, and then you need the Adaptronic pin out. So the pin outs for what these mean. And you make a spreadsheet and you basically say this pin here on the Adaptronic goes to this pin here on the Super ECU, and you make a patch harness that goes from here to the car's existing wiring. Okay, so that's one bit I have to tackle. Now, in order to make that patch harness, you need a receptacle the same as this. Well, once upon a time, I had bought this old HKS FCON PFC, and what it does is it has the factory 2JZ GE or 1JZ GTE non-VVTI JZX90 and ZZ30 Soarer loom plugs on this side, but what it has on the other side is the receptacle. So this is what the ECU, like if this black box was an ECU, it would have this on it, and you would take this and plug it into the loom, which would look like this, to the loom of the car. But this thing is a little bit different, and what this does is the loom plugs into here, and these parts plug into the ECU, and it makes this little box a piggyback ECU. Now, I looked at, I've done a little bit of work with these wires so far, but I worked out, looking at the pinout and which wires are going down. So which wires are going down this big line to the PFC. And we worked out that it's like, injectors, what is it? Ignition. So for the igniter or for the spark, and then there's power and ground, so that thing's powered. So essentially, I think what that does is it intercepts the signals and maybe gives the engine different firing events, or the pulse width on the injectors might be greater, so therefore gives it more fuel, makes it richer at higher RPM and stuff. Anyway, we're not going to be using any of this. The reason why this is exciting was I realized we need a header like this. Now, I can buy one for $200, or I can just come along and de-pin all these connectors, or if I'm being real serious, just cut them all off, and that will give me my receptacle, a bunch of wires coming off the correct pins, and then all we then need to do is pin, let's flip it over. All we then need to do is pin the correct pins to where they need to go on this ECU, because these are just, this is an Adaptronic connector version of this. So we just need to pin the Soarer loom. It's going to plug into there, and then this is going to go to the Adaptronic, and so the Adaptronic is going to read the information from the Soarer, and we're going to put a base map in here, and then eventually get this tuned, and it will run the Soarer. So at first we'll probably start out, because currently I've got a gearbox I'm doing for him, and he needs to collect a few bits and pieces for that. I've taken a R150 with a short input shaft, and I'm swapping it over for the longer input shaft. He then needs a bell housing. He's bought the clutch, but he needs a few other bits and pieces. Once it's ready to do the manual swap, we can then ditch the factory computer, and we could in fact just run it off this Adaptronic. We could stay auto, and we could have the factory computer running the auto and the Adaptronic doing everything else, but it's better for us and for the amount of inputs and outputs that this has that we ditch the automatic transmission, we go completely manual, and then we run this ECU. We can then put bigger injectors if we need to. We can have boost control. We will add wideband sensor, so then essentially we can road tune the car, and yeah, do a whole lot of cool things. It'll be a proper car on a standalone. So if any of you would like to follow along with the journey, I will start making some more posts about this. This is my latest project. I'm done with my JZX90 for now. That's going for a tune in about a month's time. If you didn't see my last video, I just added ethanol and a flex fuel sensor and did all the wiring for that. And then prior to that, I've got my blue WRX that I wired up using a plug-in link ECU, and then I added a whole bunch of extra sensors. That is also finished, working, ready for a tune. So yeah, the next thing is to concentrate on Oliver's Soarer, which is a good base, an NA2J, non-VVTi, so thick rods. You can just whack a turbo on it and straight away, and Bob's your uncle. There's going to be some cool things I want to do, such as get rid of the distributor and set up a different style of trigger system for the ignition. Also ditch the factory style coils and use R35 coils like I have done on my 1JZ on my Cresta. So yeah, a whole bunch of cool shit we're going to do. So yeah, if you want to keep up with that or see what happens, click subscribe, because soon I'll be chopping these wires and I can show you how I'm using these various documents to develop a wiring plan, which is how I did the drive-by-wire. I actually didn't do the wiring plan. I got my mate Chris to do it, which was hard enough anyway. But now that I understand what's going on, I think I'm going to try and create my own wiring plan, and then it's just a case of following the plan and going, this terminal on here goes to this terminal on here, and wiring it up. And then once it's all wired up, you can plug this into the car, load on a base map, and if you haven't done anything too weird, the car should just run. And then you can get it tuned, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, we'll just have to see how the progression goes. But leave us a like if you thought this was helpful to you. And yeah, subscribe, because I will update you on how I do all this in the future. There are some handy tips that I need to learn on how to do these various things. So what do we got? Constant 12 volt on the Adaptronic. Where's that need to go on this header here, etc, etc. So it's basically, it's not so much like Lego, it's more like joining the dots, or it's almost like doing a crossword. And yeah, it's basically, you just need to have to get your head around what's happening. So like, okay, we're dealing with a coolant sensor. A coolant sensor has a sensor wire, but then it might need a 5 volt signal and a sensor ground. So you add those two, and yeah. So anyway, more of that to come. Thanks for watching, and let's see if we can make use of this ancient FCON PFC by HKS. I mean, I saw these looms, they're like $300, but for a free receptacle and some lengths of wire, it's good.